Hello, this is Pastor John Rounds hosting the program Endurance. I pray for all of them that are listening today. I pray that you be blessed and also be blessed when you go out. Hopefully you'll be blessed mightily that when you go out, you've really take the part of lessons that I'll be ministering today and stuff, and so I'll be able to bring these out later on. Actually, throughout not only today but throughout many days, I know there's been times that I've received something from the Lord, and it's been up to if it's something the Lord really spoke to me about or talked to me about. It's something that I've realized God is speaking to me about something, and I'll take it through many days, actually through not only weeks and perhaps even years, and think about that off and on and until the Lord begins to speak to me something more. Obviously, listen, faith will take you to a place where it not only blesses you, but also will greatly bless you. And God, when God speaks to you about something, it comes to the place, now listen very closely about this, it comes to the place where it's no longer, it is faith, but it's no longer about faith. In other words, you said it, you operated in it, you've walked in it, you've talked in it, in such a way that it becomes almost not faithless, but it comes to the part where God needs to build that faith back up again. And that's the part about faith is if you go backwards, you'll go backwards. You go backwards in such a place, in such a style that you might wind up backsliding in such a way that God will have to bring you back again. And let me tell you something. I know by experience that if you go back on the Lord, it's going to take a little bit more to get you back where God begins to move and to witness in your life. I talked about Genesis chapter 12, verse, let me go back here real quick, chapter 12, 7 and 8. So I want to go to the part about verse 3. I ended that part about, and I will give this land to your seed. Abraham was able to see 450 years into Egypt and able to see the children of Israel under bondage, able to see Moses and able to see Moses carry them out. It's interesting because Paul said it very correctly in that. And jumping down to number 4, the second time, it's not only talked about the second time Abraham appeared to God, not only as one time in Genesis 12, 7 and 8, but it was 2 times that the Lord appeared to him. What it meant that God not only would presently do this, but he actually had showed him in such a form that was impossible for the Lord to break away from this. And so Abraham not only had the faith that God would do this thing, but God was beginning to build that up more and more and more. I think from chapter 12 to chapter 15, I think if I read the word very correctly, I think it refers to 15 years. 15 years. Some people look at chapter 12 to 15, which refers into 3 or 4 more chapters. It refers to that. And I might have got my arithmetic wrong. But anyway, it refers to that. But it refers to some 15 years into that. And so with that, Abraham, this was a strong covenant that Abraham was to receive, a strong covenant that God would do this thing in Abraham's life, and God would give Abraham a piece, a part, what God was going to do in the children of Israel when they came into Egypt. Now remember, it was Jacob and all of his family that went into Egypt and was actually blessed by the Egyptian king at that time. And Joseph and Jacob also was there with the Egyptian king. And so they were blessed by him for a certain amount of years. And then Israel began to grow. I don't know how, I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of around 1 million people. In that piece, that part of land where they were at, they grew within 1 million people at that particular time. And it was another Egyptian king that basically said, these people are going to be greater than we must be able to handle them correctly. And that's when he put them into bondage at that time. He knew that this was now becoming not only a place of refuge, but also a place of bondage. Interesting, there is I think it was 1 Peter who said it very pointedly that there's pleasure in sin for a season, and then comes bondage, or then comes where the enemy begins to work at you, and that's the way Egypt is. It becomes a place, and actually, if God had not have placed these people into bondage, they would have stayed there forever. They would not want to go out and want to go out when the Lord was calling them out and stuff. And so God was wanting to place them. And so this was the Lord that basically showed Abraham throughout his life, throughout his generation, to where God was beginning to bless them. Interesting, in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, it says this: God, who at sundry times in divers manners spoke in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the world. And so with that, I want to go into Genesis chapter 12, verse 8, where it says this: And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east, and there he built an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. Now, Bethel and Hai, it's interesting. Bethel is referred to the house of God. That is the house where you begin to really have the faith of God. And like I said in the part about the altar, Abraham began to cry out, and not only to worship inwardly, but outwardly about how great God is, and begin to speak this out, even amongst all the Canaanite people and all the Hittites, the Jebusites, and all these other, I call them the Ite people and stuff. And so begin to do all of these things to them, and to realize this is the real God. This is the God that I serve. And they actually were beginning to listen to what Abraham was saying, but not enough to really turn their hearts away from Balaam and all of these other gods that was going on. Now, interesting, because when you go to the house of God, that's where you place your faith at. That's where Abraham placed his faith at. Now, Hai is called a heap of ruins on the one side. So if the believer stays with Christ, stays with God, crucifies with him, and God will begin to move in his life and begin to remove the ruin out of his life and place him in the house of God, there he will be blessed by God multiply. And so it goes right back to the altar. Remember, the altar at first was the place where Abraham began to worship the Lord inwardly and outwardly. And this altar here refers to he began to remember why he built that altar. Each time that Abraham built an altar, he remembers back to why he built the first altar. He remembered, he went beyond the faith, and he remembered that. He brought this out even more in the first altar. And so it was not just a cutting off of that one altar, but he began to move in different places and begin to build even more and more altars at that time. And that's why he began to worship the Lord in a mighty way. And so this was a part where Abraham's life was at that particular time. And so he actually represented not only that altar, but he also brought that altar back up again and realized that he still needs to worship the Lord outwardly as he does inwardly. And so that's very important. Not only that, but now he realized that Sarah would be a part of that seed. Now, I'm not even going to ask why he didn't or he did do of that, but however, that's where the part that Abraham was going to have Sarah involved in that and stuff. And so this was a number 3 refers to as a temporary quarters. A temporary quarters, you'll find it in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. This was the part that Abraham began to know all things. In other words, God brought him in such a place. Isaac was born, and all of that was he began to foresee everything that God was going to do. And not only that God was going to protect him, but also God was going to deal with the rest of his children. It's an amazing thing that at one time Abraham didn't think he was going to be able to have. As a matter of fact, he thought one of his servants was going to be his son, and God said, that's not so. You will have a son, and it will happen soon. And so how soon, it's interesting, we don't think of soon as being, when I think of soon, I think probably the next day or maybe a week or maybe even 2 weeks or a month along. But this was 25 years down the line to where God was going to be able to give him that seed. But this would right down where Abraham come to the fullness of what God was going to do, the sacrificing of Isaac on a temple, the rescuing of, I think it was around 300 for Nathan. God, I'm trying to remember his name right off, and I can't recall his name right there. But anyway, for rescuing him. And so we come right down to this, and this is interesting. This is a temporary core. In other words, we have a house. I'm thankful for everyone that has a home or that's buying a home that has actually is being able to be at a home. We have so many people that do not have a home at this time. They're sleeping in now it's becoming a late spring or coming into spring, into summer. Now they're sleeping in different kinds of homes, or a lot of them are staying in one home and maybe splitting the bill and paying the rent, or paying the rent sometimes and not, and being kicked out of that home. But however, this is a temporary home. And so our home is temporary. I heard one lady at the PCG, at the Pentecostal church, one lady said at one time, and this was a Pentecostal church back in that time, say at one time, and this is our dressing room. And our dressing room is just basically getting ourselves ready to when we meet that heavenly home. Once we meet that heavenly home, now we know that we're saved. I always said that we're saved once, but when we get into heaven, we're saved twice and stuff. And I know we're saved once and we're always saved, but again, we got to keep our faith good. We got to keep our faith great, getting better and better each time that we walk in the Lord. But this is a temporary time. Listen to this. I've already mentioned this before, but it says this. Abraham knew all of this. He knew it from the very beginning. He said himself he was a pilgrim and a stranger. He walked in that. He believed in that. He had faith in that. He knew that. He knew God was going to take him through all of these things. He knew God was going to take all the troubles and the trials and the tribulation, everything about what Abraham was going through. It's interesting. Isaac actually was building altars the same way as Abraham did. As it says, as Isaac began to build altars, he began to build altars on Abraham's places that he built altars on. So he was beginning to build up his faith as Abraham built up. Oh, praise God. That if that don't give you a blessing, that certainly does me. Knowing that my seed was able to carry on, even in the private times, even in the good times, that I begin to speak it out loud, that how great the Lord is in our hearts, in our lives. But he knew he was a pilgrim. He knew he was a stranger. He knew God was going to be able to take him up out of this. Let me go into Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go out into a Canaanite place, which he should after receive for inheritance. In other words, he was a pilgrim, a stranger, received an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. He didn't go. He didn't know where he was going. God directed his way. How he directed, I don't know, but I believe the Lord showed him which way to go, where not to go. Actually, it was Isaac that God told Isaac, don't go into Egypt. Don't go into that place. And so Isaac didn't go. And so when there's a famine on the land, God told him, don't go in there. And Isaac didn't go into that place. And so there's places that Abraham was most likely starting to go, and God says, no, don't go in there and stuff. And so he was beginning to realize that. By faith, verse 9, chapter 11, verse 9 of Hebrews, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise. I apologize for that. In the land of promise is a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob. This is where the Isaac and Jacob came along, the heirs with him of the same promise. So he realized they were in that same revelation that God gave Abraham. Abraham passed that faith down into Isaac. Isaac passed that faith down into Jacob. Jacob reminds me a lot of me. Be honest with you, I believe he reminds me of a lot of each other, a lot of Christians that basically have had what is called an up and down relationship in the Lord. One moment we're way up on top. I recall one time when the Lord had brought me and it's like the highest mountain. I was so blessed. I was so privileged. I was so there were so many things happening in my life. I didn't know which way to go. I knew the Lord was there. I was blessed by the Lord, and so in that, God was really blessing me. It's like I was on a high mountain, and I just knew one day I was going to fall off that mountain and get into the valleys. But there was always something that was said in me and through me that in the valley, that's where God is the most. Where in Israel, there was I think it was a Palestine that went into the mountains and God defeated them. And so they thought, well, God defeated us into the mountains, so let's go in the valleys, and God defeated them there and stuff. And so whether it's in the mountains or in the valleys, God will defeat the enemies that come up against us. So it was within us. And so verse 9 said, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise, in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob. So the heirs with him of the same promise. Remember, the same promise as Abraham got from God, the covenant promise, Isaac got from God, and Jacob got from God, and he passed it down into the other generations there. In verse 10, for he looked for a city which has foundation, whose builder and maker is God. I love that. At verse 10, stands out so much in me, or so much in all of us, I should say, not just me, but in all of us. It should bless all of us that what God has done. He looked for a city, not just his regular home that he puts down now and then. I had a dad, and he's been gone for, I think, somewhere around 20 years, and I had him for quite some time, and I love my dad. I loved him dearly. But when things kind of hit my dad wrong, he began to move. He wanted to move. Sometimes he wanted to move all the time and stuff. And that, I didn't think about it because I was pretty young. But my mom was telling me now and then it drove her absolutely crazy. You know, they built and made a house. They built it and made it in the way that my mom wanted it. And they only stayed 2 years there. 2 years in that house. And then my dad wanted to move to the coast. And she just almost flipped over that. I didn't realize that at the time. She was greatly just upset over that. And she basically said, this is my last time I'm moving. If you move one more time, this is it, and stuff. And so he said, this is it. But my dad, some of the things he just did, my dad. And I don't want to get into the long story of him. I know that his mother passed away when he was 6 months old, and stuff, very tragically. And stuff, and so he always had that kind of and actually he moved quite a bit there, and stuff, and so he got to that place where he basically didn't know what else to do but to move, and stuff, and until he moved back to Orville, and then he gave his heart and life to Jesus Christ. Thank God for that, and now I know he's in the kingdom of God. But he gave his heart to the Lord. But it's interesting. Abraham looked for a city. It wasn't his homeland. It wasn't the tent that he put down. It was a heavenly part. I love that. He looked whose foundation, whose builder and maker is God. That is the greatest testimony. That is the greatest faith that we can ever have. Is that God built our faith so much high that there's no other way. The devil can come and try to take our faith away, and we can come back and say, it's too late, it's too little, too late now. I'm keeping my faith, and continue on and to go on with that. And then leaving off to verse 13 where it says, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off and were persuaded of them, embraced them, confessed them, they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. And so that's the part where God began to uplift their faith. And number 4 in that, and he called upon the name of the Lord. It was a public worship. Abraham began to just publicly worship the Lord throughout the rest of his life. And he actually had to begin to get a burying place for not only Sarah but himself and stuff. And so he knew where he was going, and he knew he was a pilgrim, and one that just beginning to go throughout the land, but he knew who his God was, and he praised the Lord, and he's very grateful to the Lord to what the Lord has done in his life. And so this is Abraham in the Lord. So I got a little part here, and I want to go with number 4, where it says, and he called upon the name of the Lord. This was not only a public worship, but it's also a worship throughout his whole family. His whole family and everyone that was among them. I believe it was Pastor Randy that brought out there was 300 that were trained servants of Abraham who went to get Lot. That's the name I was trying to get out, who went to get Lot. It's the 300 of them, and they were trained by Abraham. In other words, Abraham trained them up not only to know the Lord, but began to worship the Lord. I love what this said in Genesis chapter 24, verse 12. It says this, and he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, I pray thee send me good speed this day and show kindness unto my master Abraham, where his servants were saying, the God of my master Abraham. They knew and believed that God was going to answer his prayer too. So with that, in time, I pray that you've got something and received something from this, and we'll speak to you later. Have a great, great day. We'll talk to you later. This is Pastor John. Bye now.